So I'll say Namo Buddhaya, Namo Yuvabhyam, and Namo Yushmabhyam. You've actually got three datives there. But we won't go into too much detail on that at the moment. By the way, if I start to seem to enjoy this too much, you better hold me back a bit. We have what we know in our Sanskrit classes as the rabbit holes, where we pursue such exciting little byways, linguistic, dharmic, etymological, historical, sometimes an entire class. And there are at least 3 of you present, I have 4 present, who can attest to this, sometimes the entire class. Chris raises his hand, thank you, will be spent down an entertaining rabbit hole. I'll try to keep this a little bit more disciplined. What I'm going to be talking about is, hang on, I was either talking about Sanskrit and Pali for Buddhists, or why it's a good idea, or why it's possible, and if it's possible, what benefits it can give. All kind of rolled into one. I was asked to give a brief overview of what Sanskrit and Pali actually are, and what we mean when we use these words. This will be very, very brief. I'm by no means a historical scholar on the on Proto-Indo-European, but just a brief note. The history bit will be quite short. Around 4000 BC plus and minus about 1,000 years, you had groups of people speaking more or less in what is now the plains of Ukraine and southern Russia, speaking more or less a homogeneous language. By the way, at the risk of being regarded, which I am, as an elderly pedant fighting a losing battle, when I use the word homogeneous, I mean from the classical Greek homogenos, from the same birth, from the same point of origin. When I use the word homogeneous, I'm from the classical Greek homogenaios, meaning like the same all the way through. That's my elderly pedant bit. So they spoke a roughly homogeneous language, and as time went on, groups of them, the Volkswanderung, the migrations, tribal people migrations, split off. We have around 3,300 BC, a group split off and traveled roughly northwest. And they were the speakers who became the speakers of the Proto-Germanic languages, from which English derives. Then we have the pre-Greeks splitting off around 2500 BC, the Balto-Slavics, now the Slavonic speakers, round about 2500 BC. And most importantly for our purposes, the speakers of what became the Indo-Iranian languages proceeding southeast. Have I got that right? Yeah, southeast. In through what is now Iran, the Punjab, and the Ganges Valley. As time went on, their own languages developed in their separate ways, but all retaining the same essence and basis, the same essential vocabulary and grammar. As they encountered other people, other peoples, there was a mixing of the peoples, there was some cultural merging, there was the trading. The language would be to a certain extent influenced by the people they came across, in much the same way as we see as English. What's happened to English as it moves into Scotland, Wales, and my own ultimate home country of Ireland. The people who moved down into the Ganges Valley, or the Punjab and the Ganges Valley, the languages of modern India descend directly from them. The first hard record that we have of the language that they spoke dates back about 1008 to about 1800 BC. And that's the language of the Vedas. And what's particularly wonderful about that is that we know very precisely what that language was, because it was preserved so carefully in the Brahmanical tradition that to this day, and they've got it right, because to this day from from Gujarat to Bengal and from Kashmir right down to the south, you will hear the Brahmins reciting the Vedas with virtually zero discrepancy, which is very, very good evidence that it's been carefully maintained. In fact, there's been a long cultural tradition in India and Sri Lanka of the preservation of the oral tradition, which is, of course, why the words of the Lord Buddha are preserved in what is, we can be pretty confident, are their original or very close to the original form. These migrating tribal peoples, they created their own myths, legends, deities, and most importantly for our purpose, their incantations and their hymns. The hymns that they composed are what came to be known as the Vedas, the ones I said we have a very exact knowledge of because they were so well preserved. I think it's the only case that I know of in history where we have something that was recited in a certain way in 1800 BC is recited in what we can fairly reliably know is virtually unchanged now, these thousands of years later, which gives us a mighty good start for analysing Vedic, Sanskrit, and then the languages that derive from the old language, including Pali. Now, these people call themselves the Aryas, from which we have names like Aryan, Iran, and even an Era and Aram in Ireland. Maybe the Irish are making that up, but it's too good to miss, isn't it? Aaron has to come from Iran and the Aryans, you see. So it's Sanskrit. Well, Vedic Sanskrit has often been called a sacred language. Well, no, I don't see why we can say that. It was just a language. It was this old language, the Proto-Indo-European, by the way, called the Indo-European because these languages, related languages now have spread. They're spoken over most of Europe and large parts of Asia, including Iran and in India. It was the ordinary language they spoke. The hymns that they composed came to be regarded as sacred, not because the language was, but because they achieved their own status. They were composed in what was probably very, very ordinary vocabulary and grammar, but they achieved that status because of the feeling of the poetry, the incantatory power within them. Almost like shamanic incantations. These old Vedas, these Vedic hymns from 1800 and so BC, they were composed roughly between 1800 to 1500 BC. They aren't really what you might call spiritual in a Buddhist sense or in any sense that would be used in modern times. A great deal was to do with the events of life, praying to their deities for good weather, rich crops, on a marriage that they would produce healthy children, and all that kind of thing. For sickness, there was a little bit of prayer, for victory in battle. It wasn't all peaceful. By no means was it all peaceful in those days. So the sacredness of them, as I was saying, probably derives from the way that the language was used. For example, look at the genius of Shakespeare. Part of his genius was that he wrote in very, very ordinary English, but it was the way he put the words together that we can still understand perfectly easily, but we recognize the incantatory force of them. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. You see, that was composed. When did Shakespeare die? 1616, just over 400 years ago. That is it's almost ordinary modern English, and we have no problem understanding it, every single word of it. The magic is in the way the words were put together, as in the Vedas. So we have the strong oral tradition preserving the Vedas intact. So I'm just going to, goodness me, I'm really got to hurry up. Sorry about this. Rabbit holes, you know, rabbit holes. Where was I? Yeah, okay. So the ordinary languages developed in their own way. Ultimately, to one of them became what we now have as Pali. But the language of the Vedas was preserved as what the Professor MacDonnell, formerly of Professor of Sanskrit at Oxford, referred to as the priestly, the educated, sacred or priestly dialect of the Brahmanical class. About the time of the Buddha came along the mighty grammarian Panini, not to be confused with the products of Italian bakeries, much as I love panini. Please pronounce him Panini, who was a bit worried after all these years, about the time of the Buddha, around 500 BC thereabouts, was a little bit worried about this, the purity of that language becoming erased over time. So he wrote his mighty grammar, which is still regarded with great respect, enormous respect by modern linguists, that somebody that long ago could produce a work like that, which is almost an unbelievable achievement. The Lord Buddha, in the Janapada, in the kingdom of Magadha, please correct me if I'm wrong about everything. I don't mind being corrected if I'm wrong. Ever since I turned 70, which was 7 years ago, I've actually enjoyed being told that I'm wrong. I wish I'd learned that when I was 20, because the intervening half a century would have been much easier. I'd have learned more too. So he spoke a language that was the ordinary language that was spoken, his native form of speech, very close to what we know as Sanskrit, just as, for example, classical Latin is very close to what became Italian, and it's still not that far off. The language, even Dante, for example, regarded himself as writing in Latin. That's what he said, even though we now know it as Italian. There are no hard and sharp boundaries there between, say, the language that the Buddha spoke and Sanskrit. The Buddha himself might have regarded Sanskrit as simply, a more refined, posh way of talking than the ordinary speech of his time. So, actually, I'm going to run out of time. I'm going to have to skip a little bit here. So we have this linguistic continuum, Sanskrit, Pali. One important thing to remember is that English, most of the languages of Europe, the Slavonic language, Sinhala much more closely, are direct descendants of this Proto-Indo-European language. So we are, so to speak, a second cousin once removed of Pali and Sanskrit. No, seriously. And one thing I tell the students is you probably know a lot more than you think you know, because once you start to explore the connections, the etymology, there's so much there. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Hang on, I'm going to have to skip bits here. So as for the linguistic continuum, you can imagine it as, say, what's the difference between Sanskrit and Pali? What's the difference in Magadhi and what became Pali? The answer was, well, Magadhi and what became known as Pali, there's an argument between scholars that the actual language that the Buddha spoke, called Magadhi, is it exactly the same as Pali? There's discussion between the scholars whether it's exactly the same. If it's not exactly the same, then it's probably so close as to make very little difference. Imagine, for example, talking about this linguistic continuum. Let's take a hypothetical student of English who was in London in June of 1955. I'll explain why I choose that in a moment. And he wanted to experience the different forms of English being spoken. And he might decide to go to a pub in the East End of London and hear the language being spoken there, particularly at closing time when they got thrown out. But then, if he asked this hypothetical student, if, for example, on Monday, the 20th of June 1955, he had asked, where could I go to hear the most refined English being spoken in real life? He might have been well directed to the Old Bailey, the Central Criminal Court. And if he went into number 1 court on that day, he would have heard our illustrious founder, Christmas Humphreys QC, addressing the court in his capacity as counsel for the prosecution in the trial of Rose Ellis. And there he would have heard the equivalent. You see, in the pub, he'd have heard the equivalent of the Prakrit, the rough languages. In the Central Criminal Court, he would have heard the equivalent of the Sanskrit, highly refined, measured, polished language. Is there a sharp boundary between them? Well, not really. And you might start drawing the line if you go to a pub in Glasgow at closing time, and it might be hard pressed. Sorry, are there any Scottish people? Sorry, I'm Irish. I'm allowed to say it. Okay, it might be hard pressed to recognise it as the same language. Look, I'm going to have to rush on. I'm going to run out of time. Learning Pali, learning Sanskrit, okay, you can divide that into 3 things. If you want to learn to the extent of just open a book, open the suttas, open a work in Sanskrit like the Bodhicharyavatara, and just read it from cold, now that will take a lot of effort to get to that point, probably at least the amount of effort you'd have to put into a university degree, around 12 to 1,500 hours self-study, and that's even without the lectures. I'm not wishing to impose that on you, though if any of you wanted to do it, it would be wonderful. At the other end of the scale, you can simply look at individual words, which is mostly what I'll be doing this evening. Now, you might say, what's the point then? If you can get so much, which you can, as my mission this evening is to demonstrate how much you can get by just looking at individual words, what's the point of studying any grammar at all then? I would not dare to say there's no point. There's a great deal of point. In the handouts you've got, I think on page 2 onwards, some edited texts that I've done. We aren't going to go through them. I've just given that by way of illustrative example of a part in Pali from the Karaniya Metta Sutta and some material from the Sanskrit Bodhicharyavatara, where you can see with even a very little knowledge of grammar, you can be eased in and actually read the original if you're led through it carefully, word by word, meaning by meaning. And one particular reason that I would not want to put anyone off learning even a small amount of grammar to get to that point was an incident occurred that was burnt into my memory. I should have broken it more easily to everybody. It was a few weeks ago in the Sanskrit classes. We had the word adi. Let me write this. It's a very simple word. Adi, it means beginning. Sorry, I'm used to writing at this angle. The word adi. And I said, right, and this occurred in the locative form in the text you were looking at, which is adau. And then I noticed a kind of a commotion on a face, on all these Zoom faces I was looking at. And I noticed this kind of look of just horrified, pained indignation on Chris Allen's face. Because Chris Allen said, but I thought the locative ended in e. Chris, you've got that absolutely right. You have studied diligently. For the most common form of nouns and adjectives in Sanskrit end in a short a, you see. And for those ones, the locative is an e, you see. With he, a horse, ashva, on the horse, ashve, city, nagara, locative nagare, vihara, vihare. But that I had to tell Chris, and he was very dignified and restrained about it, but this only applies to the nouns and adjectives ending in a short a. If it ends in an e, like adi, I'm afraid I've just got to learn that it's adau, okay? But even with learning a little amount of grammar, you can ease yourself into a prepared, edited text. So do not be downcast, anyone. Even the small amounts of grammar that you are laboring to learn will be very useful. Now to the main part of what I'm saying. Goodness me, I haven't got much time. Can we extend this until about 2 in the morning? Great, thank you. Now to the main part of it is the meaning of words, and I'm going to concentrate from now on the analysis of words, the core vocabulary of Buddhism. And you say, well, why do we need to learn it at all? Haven't we got translations? Well, yeah, we've got heroic translations. We've got the Pali Text Society translations. We've got enormous efforts that have been done over the last 150-something years in translating these enormous efforts, for which we rightly show the greatest respect to the people who did it. However brilliant the translator, however well the translator knows the source language and the target language, in this case the Pali and the English, or the Sanskrit and the English, a translation never gets it all. So what I'm going to be doing here in giving you different views on these words is not to say translation is wrong, not at all, but just to say however good a translation is, it is partial. It might be right, but partial. And more importantly, by examining the words, the inner life of these words, you'll see they do take on a life. They've got their own imagery. They've got their own fragrance to them. They've got their own dynamic. Now, I might be saying a few controversial things here, which is, I'm Irish again, I'm allowed to. So they shouldn't be too controversial. Again, if you think I'm wrong, please say quietly afterwards. Let us look from, most people here have chanted hundreds, some of us possibly even thousands of times, Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Most of you say, oh yeah, I know what that means, Saranang, Buddhang Gacchami, of course that's very obvious, the Buddha and Gacchami I go. Saranang means refuge. Well, hang on, yes, but, and here we go. We have the Latin verb, sorry, there's a reason we're doing a bit of Latin, servare, not the same as servire, which is to serve. Servare means to protect or preserve, as in conserve, preserve, reserve, reservation, conservation, that seru root, which in an old Indo-European root, which is a seru, which we can trace it back to the Proto-Indo-European, which has the meaning more of protecting and guarding rather than a refuge. Now, a refuge can suggest, we think of refugees, fugire in Latin to flee, refugium, in English refuge, is a place to which one flees from danger. But this, the root in Sanskrit, by the way, this tick or square root sign is a convention among linguists to show the root of a word, the kind of irreducible minimum. So we have in Sanskrit then a verbal noun, sharanam, which by usual phonetic mutation, because Pali doesn't have a sh, it becomes a s in Pali. It's more than a refuge. If you look up in the dictionary, one of the meanings will be refuge, which is why we can't say it's wrong. But the primary meaning is more of a defense or a shelter. It's not running away. It's cognate with our English word shield and shelter. It's cognate with the German Schirm, as in Regenschirm, which is a rain shelter. Now, the Regenschirm you don't run away from the rain. The Regenschirm enables you to go out into the rain. Your shield, you do not run away from the fight. It protects you in the fight. So this meaning of saranam, said in Pali, Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, is not running away from something. To use the Christian imagery, it's almost like arming yourself with the sword of the Spirit. Use the Buddha as your protection as you go into the fight, not as you run away from it. Now, hopefully next time you chant Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, there will be an echo of what I've just said. You're not running away, you're going protected into the fight. The next word I wanted to look at was, I'll put this over here. The word punya, and write this up. Punya, by the way, a dot, I'm sure most of you know, when you put a dot under a letter, it's the retroflex, t, t, n, n, and so on. The punya in Pali, that becomes punya. Often translated as merit, and making merit, giving dana, making merit is how it's usually translated into English. Well, kind of yes, but the very word merit comes from the Latin merere, meaning to earn. As if somehow you've done something, therefore you're entitled to a credit in your spiritual bank balance. I've earned that money into my bank balance. But punya is likely, it's not proven, but it's likely that there's a root, pu, which is cognate with the Latin purus, meaning pure, which we have in English as pure. It has the root of purification. So the punya is not just merit, making merit as if you're earning something, you're entitled to that. It's a purificatory act, a mentally purificatory act. When you're giving dana, you aren't just, ooh, I've given dana, I want credit for that. You are letting go of an attachment. You are doing something positively useful, but there's the purification of letting go of an attachment. And for example, I just heard this just the other day, that in Cambodia and Thailand, when the laity do an act of punya, in Thai they just pronounce it as pun, and they drop off the last syllable, they talk about the sense of pun that they feel after having done such an act. That's nothing to do with earning anything. That is the feeling of a purification, that you have given up something from yourself to do some good. Now, the next word I want to look at, getting a bit closer to the real thing here, is, I don't know whether Soen Roshi was aware of this, but he was talking about the monk who cried when somebody had died in the household, the Zen master who cried. And as Soen Roshi was doing this eloquent explanation of it, I thought, this is exactly upekkha. This is the most wonderful description of upekkha. Now, upekkha, upekkha is often translated as equanimity. And as with so many of these translations, let me write the word up in Pali. It's one of the highly desirable qualities to be developed, upekkha, the so-called equanimity. Let us now analyze this word, pick this word apart. It is from upa plus, I'm writing it in Sanskrit now, upa iksha. The root iksh on its own means to look. It's cognate with the Latin oculus, make it ocular, and the Germanic augen, the eye, which in English we have as eye. We've lost the k sound. But iksh, iksha, Pali ikka, and our word eye and ocular, all from that same root. It means looking. Upa means, well, it's almost the same as English. I mean, the English word is up. It's just they put an up on in Sanskrit. It's the same word. It's not looking up. It can also mean from above. Mostly it means going up to. Yena bhagavatena upasankami, went up to somebody. It can also mean from above. So this upa iksha by phonetic rules of Santi, become upeksha in Sanskrit and, of course, upekka in Pali. It is not just equanimity. Equanimity can have a slightly negative context. The compassion, it can lack compassion. It can almost mean indifference. But not here. It means that you are looking from above. Look at the imagery of this word, what the word feels like. You're looking down from above. You're in a certain position, not disdainfully, but you have got a bigger vision. You've gained a wider vision. The Zen master who cried with his fellow villagers, he wasn't indifferent to it. He didn't treat it with equanimity. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that at all. You can be fully in the emotions and the feelings of human life, but your relationship to those emotions is looked at from the position that you have reached, whatever your development is. That is the upekkha, the seeing things from above, seeing them in context. So, on I think the front page, page 1, of the sheet that I've given you, actually 5 sheets, 10 pages, you'll see a brief select list of roots, and you'll see a brief select list of prefixes, a, abhi, ava, prati, and so on. Learning the vocabulary. You can acquire, if you know a relatively small number of the common roots, and the commonly used prefixes are not very numerous, maybe about, I don't know, 20 or something like that. By putting these together with effectively mix and match, you can make enormous numbers of words. Mostly there is a logic to what they mean, a logic to why the words mean what they mean. And if you know this very smallish number of roots, most of which relate just basic human activity and movement, sleeping, going, running, walking, seeing, flying, smelling, all these ordinary things, coupled with these prefixes, the vocabulary you can make from that is enormous. And it is it eases the burden of memory. Now, I'm not saying that you can determine the meaning of a word by looking at the construction of it. Often you can, sometimes you can't. But what you can mostly do is get the flavor of it. Let's look at the word samadhi. The 8th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, Samma Samadhi. That is composed of 3 really, really simple elements. There's the root dha, meaning to put, which when it comes at the end of a word, it morphs into a di. Don't worry about these fiddly. Take it from me, that is from the root dha, meaning to put. A mostly means, it gives the idea of towards, or reversing emotion, towards. As in gacchati, he goes, agacchati, he comes. Sam, this SAM, which is actually homogeneous, not homogeneous, homogeneous, cognate of the same origin as the Latin co and con, the idea of with, or gathering together. Actually, on a retreat a couple of weeks ago, I was unwise enough, and somebody asked me about the word, and I acted it in the kitchen. And I was told the next morning I had to do a half-hour acting, miming performance of all these Sanskrit and Pali. I mimed like this: the gathering together. Now, samadhi. See why they chose this imagery to use the word samadhi for that mental state. Gathering together. A, towards yourself, di, placing. You see? Samadhi. You can actually act the word. These 3 elements, samadhi, don't tell you what it means, but now you know what it means. You can say, the imagery comes to life. Now you know why they chose that word. It has an inner life for you, hopefully. That's not the end, not by a long way. We'll put paper, here we are. Famous last words comes next if we have time. Sometimes, very often, you will find the word will come to life for you. It will really mean something when you see it next time, when you see punya, samadhi, the other words we've used. Hopefully it will have a little bit more life for you. There are hundreds more. We haven't got time. I mean, I might still be talking here at 5 in the morning, but anyway, even then we wouldn't exhaust it. Sometimes it's a real bullseye. Sometimes it struck me, that's what's meant. It actually makes a difference. The Bodhicharyavatara, in my Sanskrit class, we've been doing chapter 7 on virya, often translated as energy or effort. Shantideva warns us against various things, and one of them is Atmava Manyana. You're going to understand that perfectly. I hope I will have failed in my mission if within 3 or 4 minutes you don't understand that perfectly. Atmava Manyana. I'm going to separate the words out. There's this annoying thing called sandhi in Sanskrit where words run together. So Atma Avamanyana becomes Atmavamanyana. I'll separate the words out here. So Atma, we know that as self. In Pali, by the way, the t and the m merge, so it becomes atta, as in anatta. Atma avamanyana. And it's often translated as self-deprecation or self-contempt. Atmavamanyana. Self-deprecation, self-contempt. Well, again, yes, kind of. And if you look up avamanyana in a dictionary, it will likely, and Moni Williams, the great Sanskrit dictionary, does give it as contempt, looking down on someone. But it dawned on me too late. I'm going to have to apologize to my Sanskrit students next time I see them in class, that when we first came across this word, I had failed to spot this wonderful significance of it. Because Shantideva is telling us in this chapter of the Bodhicharyavatara, he's warning us against laziness, alasya in Sanskrit. And it's a laziness not only of can't be bothered to get out of bed in the morning, not just that kind of laziness, but a worse kind of laziness of thinking you can't do it. And Shantideva says, even those who are now arahants and buddhas were in previous lives worms and gnats and flies. They, says Shantideva, could do it. Don't you think that you can't? You mustn't think that. It's a vice to think that you can't. And what he's talking about, it occurred to me, is the image that we have of ourselves. This image that can actually be, oops, sorry, we need a little bit more water. So Bill, water my rag for me, so to speak. Thanks, Bill. This reminded me, and some of us are old enough to have had to do this kind of thing at school, the boat race in Virgil's Aeneid. Rather important boat race with the old big galleys with the oars. Rather important boat race because whoever won that race, thanks, Bill, would have the favor of Poseidon, the god of the sea, for the rest of their lives. So it's not just like the Oxford-Cambridge boat race. There were serious stakes in this one, and both very good crews as well. And one of them, their cocks, the captains, just said something inspirational to them. And then Virgil writes, "Possunt," they can. "Possunt quia posse videntur." Literally, they can because they think they can. Or videntur, literally, they are seen. They see themselves. They had been given the image in which they believe, that strong imagination that they were able to do it. Possunt quia posse videntur, they are seen to be able, seen by themselves to be able. This avamanyana, we almost can create an English word. Ava actually is cognate with our English off. It also means down, like the root tr to cross, tara crossing, avatara, and we have in English as an avatar. Ava, down, tar, crossing. He crosses down from one realm to the other, say, from the divine to the human realm. Avatar, avatara. In Hindi, you say avatar. So then it's often down. Man, the root man is in Latin mens, in English mind, mental, man. It's thinking, making something in the imagination. Avaman, yes, it often means to despise or hold somebody in contempt, but it's putting yourself down in your own mind. It's creating a false image in your mind that you can't do it. I can't do it. And if you make that image strong enough, it becomes true, and you genuinely can't do it. So and the Atma, of course, means self. So the Atmavamanyana is creating a false image in your mind, down-minding yourself. Avamanyana, down-minding, down-thinking yourself. Thinking yourself down to the point that it becomes a spiritual obstacle to your progress. The creation of the imagination. And when I saw, ooh, that's what he really meant. Why didn't I think of that when we were doing this verse with the students? But it will come up next time. Next time we're looking at the Bodhicharya Avatara, which will be very soon, in a few weeks. God, there's so much exciting stuff that we don't have time for. Goodness me. Have I got time for samma? Samma samadhi, samma ditthi, samma ajiva, samma. Look at samma vayama. Samma vayama translated as right effort. Yeah, okay, kind of. That's part of it. Now look at samma. In Sanskrit, samyak. There is just so much in this word. So samma, oops, sorry, I'm just on a wet board now. Bill, you've put too much water on that cloth. Maybe the lower half there.
You could turn it over.
Oh, I know it. Sorry. Have we got a dry cloth? You've now wet the only cloth we have. Let's try it. Gee, Batman, good job. I took these two little tissues from my room. I thought we might need them. This is how this goes. Slightly ghost writing. Why don't we just turn the entire thing round, shall we? There we are. Sorry. Thank you very much, Hoshi. Thank you. Oops. Is it going? Whew, here we are. Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Oh, maybe something's wrong with the pen, actually, after all that. It's a little bit faint. Samma, Sanskrit, samyak. The idea is, okay, translated as right. It often has the idea of completeness or perfection, as in samma, sambuddho, samma, sambuddhasa. But there's more to it. Okay, we've got our prefix sam, which we've just looked at. Idea meaning together. We have the root, we have two roots here actually. E, go. Same as in English. Okay, when I say same as in English, what I mean is, in Latin to go is ire, he, she, it goes is it. It goes out is exit. So the E of exit goes out is the same as the E, the Sanskrit root E to go. Some E anch and the root anch. The root anch means to bend. A ch at the end of the word is never allowed to stand as a ch. It becomes a k, so ank, meaning to bend. By the way, for the etymologists, it's no accident that the bendy bit, the bendy joint at the bottom of the leg is called the ankle because it's from that same root, the bending. So sum together, eat, going, anch, bend. It's difficult just by looking at that in isolation to see what it actually means. But now go into soft focus, not the hard analysis, the soft focus. It is a harmonious coming together, harmonious, holistic, meshing. It's almost like the Chinese Tao, you know, following the course of nature. Samyanch becomes samyak. So not just right, but harmonious and in accordance with the Dhamma. That is more the meaning of Samma. You see, you can't say that translation right is an incorrect translation, but you can see how partial that translation is. If you've got a wonderful building, different all around, taking a photograph of one part of the building, it's a correct photograph of that part of the building, but it's very partial. So Samma, this idea of harmonizing with the course of nature, harmonizing with the Dhamma. Now, Vayama, often translated as effort. Okay, yeah, effort. It'll do. If you have to have a one-word translation, it'll do. It's from there's the root yam, which makes the verbal noun yama. Don't worry about the coming to an That's something you learn about very simply at the Sanskrit lessons. It just does. So yam and yama. The basic idea is lifting or pressing. The root idea is exerting force against resistance, pushing or lifting. Not a hitting force, but more like a gentle force against resistance. We've looked at let me write the word up, Vayama. In Sanskrit, it is Vyayama. Sorry, look that up. Vyayama. So yama, restraining in, pulling towards you, is then ayama. Now here's an example of how you might know more than you think you know, because you all know that word, probably all know that word, because you know the word pranayama in yoga. That is the prana, the breath, ayama, the restraining, the controlling. That is the ayama. Now, the prefix vi is often used as what might be called a separative prefix. Gacchati, vigacchati, goes away. Vyaya, going apart. Smarati, or sarati in Pali. In Sanskrit, vismar is to remember, where we get the word smriti or sati, often translated as mindfulness. Smarati, use Sanskrit now. Smarati, remember. Vismarati, to unremember, to forget. So it's kind of it's a prefix that not always, but often, has the connotation of removal, pulling apart. Now put them together. Vi, a, yama. But vi and a becomes a vya in Sanskrit. There's the yama is the effort, then a struggle. The ayama is pulling towards you. The vyama is actually somebody else, a counter force pulling away. So there's a dynamic to this word of struggling or striving, pulling against an opposing force, like the opposing moral force. So we are exhorted in being encouraged to practice sammavayama, to enter into a dynamic tension, a dynamic struggle. I might be over-translating here. I don't apologize for that, because this would have been the underlying imagery in the minds of the early speakers, as best as I can see. This is the underlying imagery that they would have thought of. We are being invited to the dynamic tension, the dynamic struggle, the yama, the viyama, the dynamic struggle, but not just an ordinary struggle. It's a samyak vyayama. It's that struggle which is done harmoniously and in accordance with the Dhamma, in accordance with life, even at the risk then again of going into Chinese, in accordance with the Tao. Am I going to be stopped by something? I think I've gone over time. There's one more really. Anyone who wants to go, please. There's one actually. I'm going to have to be disciplined. It's quite a bit of vayama that I'm having to exercise here. I fear that I might have to stop, even though I've hardly started. Nobody's rushing off.
We have another 5 minutes.
Sorry, 5 minutes, okay. Here's, God, also, I don't know which is the nicest of them. I'll see if I can cram 2 in. We have the chant that starts in itipiso, and then it talks about the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And supatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho, often translated as well accomplished. And the fourth element is samichi patipanno bhagavato savaka sangho, bhagavato of the Blessed One, savaka sangho, the Sangha, the community of savakas, Sanskrit shravakas, the hearers, people who hear, the people who listen to him, the disciples. Samichi patipanno, I actually looked up a few of the translations of this phrase, and the translations that there are many more, of course, that were as follows. One is accomplished in the practice, correct in life, entered into the proper course or way, and the last one was a being whose conduct is masterful. So nobody quite managed to encapsulate that in an agreed translation, because it's virtually impossible. Okay, samichi. Now, here's one of the advantages of learning a bit more grammar than we've done. Don't worry, grammarians. I've got my 4 grammarians here who are following the Sanskrit classes. You will learn in due course. Well, you're all going to learn now. We don't have to wait for anything. We've just looked at samyak. You make a feminine form. It looks slightly irregular, but the rules are all there. Don't worry about it. The feminine form of that is samichi. Samyak samichi. You make an abstract noun by lengthening, by vriddhi, lengthening the first, vowel. Samichi. So samichi now is a noun encapsulating in noun form everything that samyak and samma have in their adverbial adjectival form. So another is patipanno, roughly speaking, for them endowed with samichi. In other words, everything that they do is characterized by samichi, is characterized by being samyak, not just right, but all this, this harmony, this integrated harmony that is embedded in the word samyak. Patipanno, patipad is the verb form, patipada, often translated as the way. There is this fascinating prefix. What prefix is not fascinating? They all are in their own way. Pati, prati in Sanskrit, pati, mostly pati, sometimes pati in Pali. It's the idea of reciprocity. For example, the word in Pali, ganhati, he takes. But pati ganhati, he, as it were, countertakes. He takes, not just takes, but he accepts. So the pati there, that prefix indicates that it's a reciprocal action. He's been offered it, so he accepts it. So he pati takes means he accepts. It has the idea also of a dynamic relationship between a person and the object that he's looking at. So the patipada, pada just means you're going or your way. Pad, cognate with our English word foot, and it also means to go. So pajyati in Pali, padyate in Sanskrit. Just like the word foot used to be used as a verb in English. You're looking in a puzzled way. Shakespeare, foot it featly, means go swiftly, foot it featly. So this pada is the idea of a going. A patipada, often translated just a path or a way, but it's a way on which you are set. You are dynamically orientated. Your life energy, again, slightly over-translating, but the imagery is there in the word. Your life energy is directed and orientated in that patipada. And if you are patipanno, yes, the word can mean accomplished, but it also, I think probably does mean in this expression, that you are, the patipanno is the adjectival form, past participle adjective, somebody who is set on that way. So if you are patipanno, it means that you are dynamically set on that way. Your life energy is directed. Now, samichi patipanno, your life energy is directed on that path with samichi, with this harmonious interaction, this integrated, morally integrated, spiritually integrated with life. Slight over-translation, yes, if you're just looking at translation, but I don't apologize for it as being how it was probably seen, the underlying resonances of these words as they were seen by the original speakers of the language. Okay, that's part one. The other part, 5 parts, actually, okay, I will stop now. When I was preparing this, I thought, look, there's so much I'm going to have to cut out. I'm so sad. Like the Buddha's famous last words. The famous last, okay, I won't go through them unless you will beg me to. The famous last words, which are frequently translated as impermanent, are all conditioned things, strive on with diligence. Vaya dhamma sankhara appamadena sampadeta. So, impermanent, all conditioned things, strive on with diligence. Again, yeah, okay, if you've got to do a one-word translation, it'll have to do, I suppose. But it doesn't really cut it. Is it okay if I just explain these famous last words of the Buddha? Okay. Actually, in case we really do run out of time, I'll do the second last word first, is appamadena. Appamadena, it might be difficult to say what was the most important single word that the Lord Buddha ever said in his entire teaching career spanning 40 years. Was it 45 years? How old was he when he started teaching? Anyway, 40 plus years, think about that. So, appamadena sampadeta. Appamadena, it's an instrumental form, means with appamada. As I say, it's difficult to say it's the most important single word he ever said, but if there was, if there was a vote on it, that would have my backing, that vote. It would have been the last word he said, but for the fact that in Pali, you have to put the verb at the end, which is why it was the second last word. If you'd been saying it in English word order, you would have sampadeta appamadena. Appamada, why is it so important? With diligence. Okay, that's not a very good translation. Why is it so important? Because it was that one word that he used to encapsulate the entire course we should be following. Last 2 words, sampadeta, strive on, carry on. Appamaden, how? What should we do, Master? In one word, how should we live our lives? The one word he chose was appamadena. From the root, mad. And if that looks a bit like our English word mad, it's because it is. The meanings have changed slightly, but it's that same word. Mad, actually, if you look up in the dictionaries, it's the idea of taking pleasure in something. And the idea of chasing pleasure, unmindfully chasing pleasure. Unmindfully chasing pleasures and resisting things you like are kind of most basic evolutionary instincts of approaching what you like, avoiding what you don't like. It's the classic form of the unmindfulness, just doing what you feel like at the time without standing back and looking. That's the idea of them. Now, with the prefix pra, in Pali, pa, pamada, Sanskrit pramada, that embodies the idea of something fourth. Is cognate with the Latin word pro, as in proactive progress, that kind of thing, carrying on in a certain way. So pramad, and the verbal known as pramada, Pali pamada, is carrying on in exactly that way. Carrying on your life, just chasing what you like, avoiding what you don't like, the unmindful, the unexamined life. The negative form, the negated form, you can put an a in front of it, same as you can in Greek. So apramada is non-pramada, when to apramada Sanskrit becomes appamada in Pali. So live your life with non-pramada, not just carrying on unmindfully, chasing this and chasing that. So it was the exhortation to watchful mindfulness, resisting with samavayama, this right effort, resisting this constant pull of pamada, rushing after what you like, avoiding what you don't like, living life on a whim of what you like and don't like. That was his last word. Second last word, as I said, would have been his last word, but for the fact he had to stick the verb at the end. Am I going to have to wind up now? Okay, I will. So I say, as I was preparing this, there were so many nuggets, and I thought, no, there may be some people who might actually derive a little bit of benefit from it, who might be able to look at Pali words in a new light, say, that's what it means. Just as somebody said to me the other day as I was explaining, said, I will remember the conversation. She was a Japanese lady. I will remember the conversation. And that's a very good way of putting it. Not remember every detail, but when you see these words, appamada, punya, the other words we discussed, samavayama, just remember the conversation, that these words have their inner life, and it can just give a little bit of extra light. So I'm not refuting what any other teacher says or what any other translator says. My mission here has been trying to open a little window to show you, by looking at the inner life of these words, the structure of these words, they will come to life, they have more meaning for you, and might even assist your actual practice. So I probably... Okay, I better wind up here. Thank you. Thank you to you all. Thank you. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you, Roshi. Good.